What? Why are you shaking your head? You're welcome.
What is going on, guys? Ryan Heath here with Fantasy Points, bringing you the Cashing Points show for the wild card round. I am joined by HiLow and by Johnny Proctor here. Let's get right into it, gentlemen. So let's start out with the Saturday games, starting with the Chargers at the Houston Texans. Chargers 3-point favorites, 41.5 over under. Fairly clean injury slate. Josh Palmer is out though here. Quentin Johnson expected to be in. HiLow, I'm going to turn it over to you. Talk to me about Justin Herbert first and this Chargers side of this game.
Yeah, so the Chargers have effectively been in like playoff must-win mode for the past 3 games. In each of those 3 games, they attempted more passes than they had rush attempts, which kind of makes sense when you consider that this team has averaged just 4.1 yards per carry this season with 7.6 yards per pass attempt. Those ranked 24th and 9th, respectively. So we should get a sense that this team is more comfortable trying to move the ball through the air. They signed Zeke this last week for the playoff push, whatever that means. I don't know. But I would expect him to be inactive, having to learn an entirely new playbook for like 5 days at the time of this kickoff, with it being on Saturday. So Gus Edwards is healthy. We have J.K. Dobbins coming in as questionable, expected to play. But I would expect them to do the bulk of their heavy lifting through the air. We saw last week with Quentin Johnson, saw like effectively his coming out party, 14 targets, caught 13 for 186. But this offense still kind of is built around the mismatches that Ladd McConkey can create over the middle of the field. So he is an interesting volume potential with Ladd McConkey. Justin Herbert, the matchup isn't great. It's not bad, but it's not great. I mean, the Texans have probably the top like defensive end duo to be able to get pressure on the quarterback. So this isn't a great spot. They got Derek Stingley on the back end. So I would expect the additional pressure, the additional talent on the back end to kind of funnel stuff through the middle of the field. So I like Ladd McConkey a good bit for some volume here. Justin Herbert, man, it's really hard for me to click with some of the other names on the slate.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you there. I think Herbert is a fine enough play. 26 DK over his last 5, just about. We've seen them kind of really push in these blowouts, even against the Patriots and the Raiders the last 2 weeks. So that gives you a little bit of confidence. But yeah, I'm with you. There are definitely quarterback plays I like more on this slate. Quentin Johnson, I think I'm a little more interested in than you are. It's just really nice that he's only 4,800. Very hard to save salary on this slate. Obviously, coming off that big game, a full 2K cheaper than Ladd McConkey has out-targeted him in 2 of their last 4 games together. So I'm fairly optimistic on QJ as well. Johnny, anything else there on the Chargers? Or if not, feel free to take us over to the Texans.
One thing I just want to note, like in these playoff slates, we generally see like the RB1s, the workload will be more than what you see during the regular season. So like anyone doing, well, you know, maybe I'll just throw Gus Edwards in there as like my last guy in. I tend not to do that on these mini playoff slates like you would on like a normal 2-game sort of in-season slate. But it the question mark on Dobbins, makes it a little harder to want to like jam him in. But I do think we probably see, as long as he's healthy, like the biggest workload of the season probably for Dobbins, or at least in terms of snap share. And with Herbert, it's like he's not a great play, but he does get you the 2, like DJ Shark and Darius Davis come into play with Palmer out. So if you are MMEing, he is pretty interesting because it's pretty easy to like rotate in those wide receivers. Those are kind of going to be like the 4. It's going to be McConkey, Johnson, and those will be the other 2. And so that's kind of nice. But overall, I feel like this is, in terms of if you're playing the full 6-game slate, this is like the worst game of the 6, because both of these offenses are, I mean, the Chargers have been a little faster, but they're not like, they like to sort of control the ball and play a little slower than a lot of these other teams. So I don't love anything on the Chargers side. But But I do think on the 2-game slate for Saturday, you definitely want to consider some of those cheaper wide receivers if you're MMEing on the Charger side.
Yeah, I mean, on Dobbins, like these past 2 weeks, he's gotten 60% of backfield XFP. That's actually been a 17.6 expected fantasy points per game workload, which is fairly decent on a slate where it's kind of Bucky Irving and then no other running back plays that I feel amazing about that aren't extremely expensive. So I am going to be clicking Dobbins at least a decent bit just because he kind of makes lineups work. But yeah, maybe there will be other running back plays that are cheaper that you guys like more that we'll get to. So I guess other than that, only other guy I want to mention is Will Dissly. And I'm going to say this about every tight end on this slate pretty much, but no one stands out like that much. I would just be putting your tight ends in with your game stacks in every lineup possible, essentially. I don't, maybe we'll get to someone you guys feel strongly about, but it just kind of play the tight end that works for your stack for me. But yeah, moving over to the Houston side, I am seeing some ownership around the industry projected for CJ Stroud. I kind of don't understand why. He's hit 21 DK a single time all year. It was against Jacksonville, which literally every quarterback is capable of hitting 21 DK against Jacksonville. It's kind of a worst possible schematic matchup with all the too high that the Chargers like to deploy for both Stroud and Nico Collins. So HiLo, I don't know if you have any alternative take here, but are we just kind of on the Texans stay away for the full 6-game slate?
I think there's an interesting discussion to be had about Nico because there's only, I count 7 players that can put up a score that kind of wrecks the slate. It's like you got Saquon Barkley, you have Derrick Henry, and potentially Bucky Irving at the running back position. Then there's like 4 wide receivers, and I think Nico has to be in that discussion. It's Justin Jefferson, maybe Mike Evans, Nico Collins, Puka Nacua. And then maybe AJ Brown. So 7 or 8 names that can put up like a score that you had to have on this slate. And what's so interesting about that is all these games are played sequentially. So we'll get more information after this game, primarily around like, hey, how did Nico do relative to ownership and cost? So we don't like build our rosters for these sequential slates. Like Thanksgiving was one, the Saturday slates that we've had are another example of this. We don't build for the entire slate. We build for the outcome of each game as they're played. And we can take the new information and adjust and see like how close to projected optimal we were. So Nico's probably the one name from this game where I'm like, did he hit? What was his ownership? How does that project for optimal? He at least deserves like mention in that sense because he's the premier name from this game. So the matchup isn't great. We know all those things. That this team has not been playing great. They did give us a snapshot one series last week where D'Amico Ryans was like, "Oh, our guys got to be ready to play." It's like, "Oh, okay, we talked about that last week." It's like, I don't believe you. First of all, they did play one series. On that series, CJ Stroud attempted 6 passes. 5 of them were directed at Nico. So to me, that kind of tells me like, hey, we got to get our shit right as we're heading into the postseason. And it's going to be, you're our dog, dude. You got to go do this. We're out Stephon Diggs. We're out Tank Dell. So I'm a little bit more bullish on Nico, I think, from that whole like theoretical discussion. Suffice to say, like the matchup isn't great. All that stuff does still apply.
Yeah, no, I definitely hear you there. In terms of guys capable of putting up a slate winning score, I guess you can't forget about Nico on such a short slate. I do want to bring up one other name on this side of the game, and that's Deontay Johnson as an extremely disgusting punt. He's 3,500. He got 4 targets in the first half last week. None of them on the first series from CJ Stroud, which is important. So definitely possible that Deontay Johnson plays 0 offensive snaps in this game. Want to make that very, very clear. But we've seen him go out and command targets on 3 different teams at this point. If he is on the field, he is going to earn a 25% target per route run, 8 targets per game with the Panthers earlier this year. if they decide, okay, it's the playoffs, this is our time, we may as well throw Deontay Johnson out there and see if he can help our offense. If he's an every snap player, very, very possible that he just makes your entire lineup at 3,500. So what do you think about that, Johnny? And is there anything else on this Texan side that you want to cover? I guess any interest in Joe Mixon as well?
D'Amico Ryan says they're going to feed him more. At least that was what his quote was. And I think everyone's kind of been running with that. And I think that's why the Stroud ownership, people want to do just like the Nico, Deontay, Stroud. It's like an easy stack if Deontay is what people sort of want him to be. Hopefully we can find more information than just and that quote was on Monday, I think. So it's like, what does that even mean? But that said, like like you're saying, if he is a full-time player, or at least I doubt he's passed, John Mechie overnight or anything, but if he's a full-time third wide receiver, he still could be involved enough to, pay off 3,500. I do think it makes Mechie, like, people aren't going to play Mechie as much. And I think as long as he's healthy, is probably a better play than Deontay Johnson if the ownership continues to climb. But I think that's something we'll want to think about in the morning. But yeah, I think Mixon is really interesting because everyone loved this dude for the first half of the season. And then after he started to bust every week, everyone completely hated him. You can run on the Chargers. So there is some, possibility that Mixon can get, 20 some touches in this game. And if that happens, he's a pretty good price. I mean, this is a guy who was, 7,200 you would have been stoked to pay that, 8 weeks ago. So some interest there. It's been hard though, just because it seems like he's worn down a little bit. The way they run the offense is just so miserable. So in tournaments though, I think in the full slate, I think Mixon's a pretty hard sell, like Hilo said, to spend that running back slot in the first game is a hard sell for me. But I think on the Saturday slate, I do have some interest in Mixon, just knowing that people just hate this guy.
Yeah, no, definitely a Saturday only play for me as well. Yeah, I mean, on the Texans offense, they have been behind the Patriots in EPA per play since week 11 when Nico Collins came back. So that's about how sluggish it's been. Real concerns for me that the Texans just fall out of this game pretty quickly. I'm a little surprised how close the spread is. I know some others at the company and around the industry are as well. But I think that does it for this game. Let's move on to the other Saturday game. We've got the Steelers at the Ravens. The Ravens 8.5-point favorites, 43.5 the game total. Zay Flowers is out. Nelson Aguilar and Justice Hill should both be back. Hilo, talk to me. Is this Lamar Jackson week? Is it gonna be the final MVP tryout here?
Dude, if I had a vote, Lamar Jackson is getting it for MVP. I don't have a vote, but that's my stance on the whole situation. Looks like AP is in agreement after they named him first team. But anyway, I mean, he has to be in consideration. The thing, like, he can just, especially with like how he has quote unquote failed like in the playoffs up to this point in his career, like he's still got that monkey on his shoulder, and a pissed off Lamar Jackson is a kind of scary proposition for the Steelers here. That said, if I were to pick one defense that is schematically speaking, like structured in a way to limit Lamar Jackson, it is the Pittsburgh Steelers. So we have to also be just honest with ourselves about the fact that, like, hey, if they can contain him to the pocket, and we saw them do that once this year, it was the game in Pittsburgh, but we did see them contain him to the pocket, and we kind of saw the structure of the offense break down. That's what the Steelers are likely to want to do this week, is win an ugly game, take it in the fourth quarter, shorten the game, keep Lamar Jackson under wraps. So can they do that? I don't know. It worked the first game these two teams played. Did not work the second game these two teams played. This is their third meeting, so that tells me this is a pretty wide range of outcomes game. We could see everything from like the Ravens to completely dominating to the Steelers like being able to contain Lamar Jackson and making this a fourth quarter game. So the upside is very clearly there. He is the MVP in my book. We should get a little bit more condensed offense through the air because Zay Flowers is out. I'd expect borderline extreme rates of 12 personnel, getting Mark Andrews and Isaiah Likely out there as well. Charlie Kohler is back. He came back in week 18, so he should see some snaps as well. But then we have it's kind of easy to stack Lamar Jackson too. All of his stacking partners are pretty cheap. Like Mark Andrews and Rashad Bateman are the two most expensive, and they're at like 4,700 and 5K respectively. So even down to like some of these secondary options, Nelson Aguilar, Tylan Wallace was on the field 73% of the offensive snaps last week. That's probably Nelson Aguilar this week. So Nelson Aguilar is a better like real life NFL wide receiver than Tylan Wallace. So I don't know. There's a wide range of outcomes and a lot of options here.
Yeah, I'm with you. Especially on the tight ends, I think Zay Flowers being out really helps out Andrews and Likely a lot. I guess I lied about 5 minutes ago. These are the only two tight ends on the slate that really stand out to me. After Flowers left the game, Andrews had a 31% first read target share, Likely 23% of the team's first read targets this past week. So I do think we could see it condense around that. They are kind of the two tight ends that project enough to like be popping in our optimals in our optimizer today. I was noticing. So yeah, I don't know that I want to build lineups with both of them necessarily outside of a Lamar Jackson stack, of course. But yeah, definitely two pieces you can't lose track of on this slate. Johnny, Derrick Henry, is it too obvious? Is there anything I'm missing with Derrick Henry just as a huge favorite, as an amazing GPP play, or any alternative take there?
Yeah, and I think especially as poorly as Pittsburgh's offense has been playing for the last month, and as well as the Ravens defense has been playing, I think that's one thing that people lose sight of a little bit, is just how good the Ravens defense has been since they got Michael Pierce back, and they've gotten a lot of their secondary pieces more healthy. They've crushed. And so Pittsburgh is just like sort of a dead team walking into the Ravens when they are healthiest on defense, playing in Baltimore. It's just like a brutal spot for them. And so I think that's where Lamar fails, is if the Steelers offense doesn't show up, the Ravens defense does show up, and then Henry gets 25 carries. And I think it's also important to note that there was that Steelers game where the Ravens really struggled. Henry, I think, had like no fourth quarter carries. And I think Baltimore probably looks back at that and says, we're not going to do this again. Like, we're not going to give up on him when something pops up. All that being said, I do think Justice Hill's pretty interesting too, coming back. I feel like he's a guy they probably want to get involved a little bit because they're going to need him, when they play teams like Buffalo and Kansas City. So there's a build that I think people are going to like to do where they play Lamar with maybe two pass catchers and they play Jaylen Warren. I think playing Justice Hill instead of Jaylen Warren with Lamar gets you pretty different. And if Lamar does have one of his nuclear MVP games, we've seen Justice Hill be really involved. Like on the, when Lamar throws 5 touchdowns, I feel like Justice Hill like always has one of them. He's just so, I don't know. It's just like all of a sudden Justice Hill has 15 points on like 6 touches. So he's a guy I think is kind of interesting. But obviously, if you're just going with sort of like who is going to be the most successful running back on the Saturday slate, it's clearly, you would clearly say Henry. So Henry, Ravens defense is pretty expensive. But I think it's a really, really strong stack for the Saturday slate if you can make it work with some of these other cheap wide receivers.
Yeah, no, I really like that call for the Saturday slate with Justice Hill for sure. Anything on the Steelers side, guys, it's very tough for me to talk myself into a lot of these guys here. Calvin Austin's cheap, I guess, is about the best thing I can say about him. Pickens, this Ravens defense has been so much better. At one point, we were talking about them as one of like the most vulnerable deep funnels in the league, but they've just been lights out really the last 10 or so weeks of the season. So any interest in Steelers high-low, or can we move on here?
I think Pat Fryermuth is worth mention. He had his highest route participation rate of the season in Week 18 with them chasing and with them in a kind of borderline must-win game. So saw the 11 targets. I think he's at least interesting, worth mention here.
Yeah, no, good, fair enough there. Yeah, he's cheap on FanDuel as well. Good on Steelers, Johnny, or can we move on?
I mean, I think we have to at least consider that no one's going to play Pickens. And if Wilson does connect on some of these deep, like we've seen Baltimore get beat deep, not recently, but we've seen them get beat deep throughout the year. So as a guy with really low ownership who has like a 25-point ceiling, I think Pickens is a guy. If I was MMEing, I wouldn't want to forget. But he's definitely not a guy I could play on a hand build. And then I think Jaylen Warren will be pretty popular. I feel like he'll probably be a little over-owned just because they still want to use Najee like annoyingly enough.
Yeah, no, fair enough. I don't hate the idea of like Najee with Steelers D just to get a little bit different there. They have a very strong correlation between the two of them. Could be a way to play it. Obviously kind of thin. It's only a 21% implied win probability for the Steelers. But that is one option you could go. I don't know that that's something I'm brave enough to do against Lamar, but it is out there technically. Let's move on. Let's move on to the Sunday games. Let's move on to some of the good games, frankly. So we've got the Broncos at the Bills. Bills 8.5-point favorites, 47.5-point over under. Pretty clean game here for injuries. I guess, are we going to get Superman Josh Allen? Is he just going to always be Superman Josh Allen in the playoffs? That's what I would hope. 23 DK points in games the Bills win by multiple scores, nearly 27 in all of his other full games. We've seen the Bills secondary kind of struggle a little bit, at least against the Rams and the Lions in recent weeks. So maybe there's a chance that the Broncos can kind of push them, contrary to what the spread would say. HiLo, what is kind of your take here on Josh Allen? And I guess quickly along with that, do you have any interest in Bills pass catchers to stack him with, or do you prefer to play him naked?
Yeah, that's the thing though, right? Is like we want to play Josh, but it's really hard to figure out who the hell to play with him. They're running 5 wide receiver spread. They're running 2 primary tight ends. So it's like, do we have to even? I would argue no. I would argue you don't have to force somebody. I would argue it's more important to have a Bronco on the roster with Josh Allen than it is somebody to pair him with, because again, like you alluded to, if we're playing Josh Allen, we need Superman Josh. We need a 40 burger. Like that's why we're playing him. Josh Allen even scoring like 32 fantasy points probably isn't winning you a GPP even on a short slate. So what can push Josh to be Superman Josh? And I think this game has sneakier shootout potential than Vegas is currently implying. The Broncos over their last 7 games of the season averaged 32.6 points per game. Like that's pretty good. That's no shitter. That would put him 3rd in the league if extrapolated over the entire season. We don't like doing that, but it is what it is. So yeah, I think the Broncos have it in them to push Josh and make him Superman Josh. And as was just put in the chat, Marvin Mims, man, they're using him all kinds of funky ways. They're putting him in the backfield. They're putting him in the slot. They're putting him in motion. They're doing all kinds of fun stuff with him to just get him in space and get the ball in his hands. And we've kind of seen now like what he can do. And I was really high on Marvin Mims, just like Scott was last year. Just kept playing for that breakout game, man. But this year, like they're not saying, hey, you're a Z-type wide receiver. You're going to run deep. You're going to be the field stretcher. You're going to manipulate safeties. Like they're doing things to scheme him the ball. So I prefer like a nice tidy. It looks weird on paper and it goes like contrary to standard DFS theory, but just saying like Marvin Mims plus Josh Allen, boom, done. I think it's a really fun way to attack the spot.
Okay, yeah, I'm really glad to hear you say that because I am on a similar page. Yeah, I really like Marvin Mims as the bring back here. Obviously, he's overpriced for his role and his volume, but yeah, they've just been using him on all these screens, on all these routes out of the backfield, out of the slot. He's averaging over 5 yards per route run out of the slot this year. over 4 yards per route run out of the backfield. The Bills just kind of get killed on all this stuff over the middle of the field. They're top 3 in yards per game allowed on screens and to the slot. So it just seems like a good match here. And like Mims could be the one to kind of push this game script. So definitely with you there. I guess we should mention Khalil Shakir just because he projects to be pretty popular. I think he's a fine cash play. He's cheap enough for his volume. But he's also only gone over 16 DK once all season with all of the Bills pass catchers healthy. So I just don't really see the upside to want him in any tournament lineups, frankly, with or without Josh Allen, just kind of regardless. Do you think anything differently there, John, or should we move back over to the Broncos side?
Yeah, I think the on the Bills side, it's like everyone keeps playing Shakir. They're just like, well, Shakir's the guy you play with Josh Allen. It's like, says who? I mean, it's none of these guys are full-time wide receivers. They rotate all of them. I mean, they play Mac freaking Hollins like a million snaps every week. It's like you have no idea who is going to be the one, but everyone continues to like play Shakir like into massive ownership. And then, last week it was what Keon Coleman had 10 targets in the the meaningless game. Like maybe they want to get him more involved this week. I don't know. Amari Cooper's back with the team. He had some weird stuff going on. They didn't say exactly what that was. So yeah, good luck figuring that out. But I think that's what makes Allen, especially in a small slate where if you're MMEing, rotating him with these other wide receivers, like if one of these guys has 2 touchdowns not named Khalil Shakir, it's like wins you the slate if Allen ends up being the QB1. So that's something to keep in mind. I wouldn't want to have a ton of Khalil Shakir ownership in the large field tournaments. He's probably going to be like the 3rd highest owned wide receiver. And I feel like in large field, that's a bad play. Especially being in the first game, like just playing him into ownership seems bad. And I agree with you. I think Broncos are getting huge disrespect from the betting side. They've just been a really good team the second half of the year. Knicks is playing well. The Bills are a team that, they look great 90% of the time. Sometimes they look terrible. Denver defense is good. I think 9.5. I think that spread's a little big. So I like the Denver side too. And I think it's really easy and really clean to play Sutton or Mims, picking between the two of those. And I wouldn't even mess around with the Broncos running backs. I don't think I care to play any of those guys.
Yeah, no, definitely with you there. In the circumstance where the spread is correct, James Cook is a little bit interesting. Averages 21.5 DraftKings fantasy points per game in games that the Bills win by multiple scores. He's like a pretty decent GPP play. I think Cook, fairly cheap for once. He's under 7K. I feel like he's been overpriced kind of all season. And there's a chance that they say, okay, it's the playoffs. We are not going to play. We're going to play him on more than 50% of the snaps now. But I guess the only other guy in this game I really want to make sure we spend time on is Bo Nix. So to me, Nix is a top 3 tournament play at the quarterback position. He has outscored Jaden Daniels from week 5 on. We've seen him hit 30 or more DK points 3 times this year. For perspective, Sam Darnold has only hit 29 once this entire season. Nix's rushing has kind of gone away over the second half of the year. We tend to see some quarterbacks just run more in the playoffs. I know that has been like a conversation with Josh Allen all season. We could potentially see similar with Nix. He was averaging over 6 rushing fantasy points per game through the first 8 weeks of the season. If that comes back, I think it's pretty interesting to be playing Nix into relatively low ownership last I checked. So any thoughts on Nix and stacking up the Broncos, HiLow?
No, I think it's completely viable. It's an interesting discussion because the salary allocation or the salary difference between Knicks and Josh Allen, like at what point does the score differential offset that? And the truth is, like, we don't know. On a shorter slate, like, we know that the smaller the slate, the closer to optimal we have to be in order to win. That's a really convoluted, like, theoretical equation that has to get worked out. But the fact of the matter is we don't know. Like, so I think Knicks is completely viable here. I would prefer to play 2 of his pass catchers with him because we're talking we probably need 3+, maybe even 4+ touchdowns out of him to be in the optimal discussion. So it's probably going to be like something like Mims plus Cortland Sutton if I'm playing Knicks, and kind of just I'll sprinkle that into MME all day.
Yep. And yeah. I want to note Knicks has been running again. He hurt his back and he didn't run for like 4 weeks. And then he started running again. What is it? Week 15. So I think we'll continue to see that. And that's why I was like waiting to play him. I kept telling everyone every week, like, eventually this guy is going to get over this back injury and he's going to pop again. And then last week he, exploded with both of those wide receivers. As Hilo said, it's so easy to just play those two. And I think we probably see him run even more in the playoffs than before. So yeah, he's definitely one of my favorite GPP plays. I hate that he plays first, but I do think this is a good spot for him.
Yep, totally with you guys. I think that does it for that game. We can move on to Packers at Eagles. Looks like the spread is up to 5 points in the Eagles' favor now. 45.5 point over under. Christian Watson is out for this game. Rest in peace, my king, Christian Watson. Jalen Hurts sounds like he's going to be all set. He practiced, got through concussion protocol, all good. This game for me is a little tough to know what to make of it. It's 2 teams that just want to run the ball constantly, as we've seen, especially with the Packers over the last 8 weeks or so. 2 teams that rank bottom 10 in pace and seconds per play, bottom 3 in neutral pass rate. So this one just in general is I'm kind of viewing as either I stack it up and just bet on this game environment, or I kind of largely ignore it. Maybe outside of like an isolated bet on Jalen Hurts, because as we know, Jalen Hurts can break any slate by scoring multiple rushing touchdowns from inside the 2-yard line. He's done that 3 times this year, averaged 32 DK when he has, 20 DK when he hasn't. If that's a 20% chance of him kind of breaking the slate, he's priced down to just 7,300. I'm at least a little bit interested. But I also don't know that me having some interest in Hurts means that I have to believe that this game is going to go off. So yeah, talk to me about Jalen Hurts, Hilo, and are you especially interested like in any pass catchers from this game?
From a theoretical sense, yes. They're not going to project well. They're not like if you just do a 1-for-1 and look at AJ Brown versus any of the other top guys. Puka Nacua is the easiest one. Puka Nacua is going to project much better. That said, like, these are 2 head coaches that are amongst the best at making these in-game adjustments. Matt LaFleur, obviously of the Kyle Shanahan extended coaching tree. That's kind of the bread and butter of that entire coaching tree, is they're able to come into games with a game plan and they're able to make the adjustments within, the first couple of possessions. So while Jordan Love has not been playing to the level he was last year, while this team has been amongst I think they're ranked 3rd in rush rate over expectation in the second half of the season, I think we at least need to keep in mind that this could turn into a back and forth affair. We saw it week 1. I mean, that was night and day from where these teams are now. Like, the Eagles are the PFF's top ranked secondary now. They have definitely been playing better football of late. Obviously, we know what happened after their week 5 bye. They're the most run heavy team in the NFL. Actually, the Colts edged them at the end of the season, but I think we just need to at least be honest with the fact that this game probably carries a wider range of outcomes than the field is probably going to give credit for. So yeah, I like Jalen Hurts a good bit. I like AJ Brown a good bit. I think Tucker Kraft on the other side. We'll get to those guys in a minute, but like Tucker Kraft, Jaden Reed, those types, even Dontavian Wicks a little bit. Romeo Dobbs is going to be on the field a ton. I think there's a lot of fun ways that you can approach this game that the field is probably not. I mean, even Saquon Barkley, again, like is back to low ownership. So, in my opinion, I think you nailed you hit the nail on the head there. I would prefer to be stacking this up. But I think that Saquon Barkley, especially, he's probably going to garner some of the lowest ownership of that list of 7-8 guys that we said earlier that can put the slate out of reach. So he is worthy of one-off consideration.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. 5 games over 35 DK this year. There's only one other player on the slate has done that even once. Little bit insane to think about what Barkley could do in a game where the Eagles might decide, hey, let's give him all of the backfield touches instead of 78% of backfield XFP, right? Barkley, I definitely think you can't ignore. I'm with you kind of in a theoretical sense where like AJ Brown is ranking top 2 in every market share metric this year. If the market share grows bigger, if for whatever reason the game shoots off, then Brown looks incredible against some of those higher owned alternatives that are priced up. Johnny, anything else to say on the Eagles, or do you want to take us over the Packers?
I think sort of to HiLow's point, if I'm stacking this, if I'm playing multiple pieces from this game, I wouldn't want to have like running back, wide receiver sort of combos, because I feel like if the running backs in this game blow up, this game probably sucks. So that's kind of how I would keep in mind putting the pieces together. I would much rather have like a AJ Brown, I don't know, Tucker Kraft or AJ Brown, Jaden Reed kind of deal for my mini than like an AJ Brown, Josh Jacobs mini stack. So that's something I would think about. And that's probably AJ Brown and Saquon Barkley are really the only two I would be excited about on the Eagles side, unless you were playing the Jalen double, which is pretty expensive for this slate.
Yeah, it's expensive, and it just feels thin to me. Like I feel like either one of AJ Brown or Devontae Smith can go off. We've kind of seen that in recent weeks. It seems like it's very rarely both of them breaking the slate. I guess moving over to the Packers, I have a really hard time getting interested in Jordan Love. Has only gone over 19 DK once in his last 11 games. We have seen this Packers team just play like they're up 14 points, even when they're down by multiple scores. That Vikings game a couple weeks ago was especially frustrating. I do think the receivers are interesting. Jaden Reed into kind of a slot funnel matchup, at least by schedule adjusted. Dontavian Wicks is cheap. We have seen him average about 16 expected fantasy points per game when Christian Watson has been out this year. So that's at least one interesting-ish way to save salary for me. Again, if you are correlating this game in some way. And anything to add here on the Packers, HiLow? Oh, he's muted. Oh,
nailed it. God, it's like once a session now. I do this. I would at least mention the Packers defense. They've put up double-digit fantasy points 7 games already this year. They have 31 takeaways, 45 sacks. If they have any shot in hell in winning this game, it's got to probably come from their defense. Jair Alexander being done for the season definitely hurts, but they still have guys that are taking the ball away. Xavier McKinney is an interception machine this season. So I think if they return a touchdown or return a pick for a touchdown or something like that, they're probably going to be borderline optimal, or at least in the optimal discussion at defense. And I think I would honestly prefer playing them like with Jalen Hurts.
Okay, would you not play them with Josh Jacobs then?
I don't think you need to. Josh Jacobs is a guy who, like, the efficiency should be there. It's not a good matchup on the ground. like one of the worst matchups on the ground. He's probably going to get his 19 to 22 running back opportunities. Highly unlikely, in my opinion, to see more than that. So just comparing like apples to apples, I would much rather pay up the extra 500 for Derrick Henry, even go down to Bucky Irving for 700 cheaper.
Yeah, no, I think I'm with you on Jacobs. He's only gone over 4x this salary once all season. I think they want to feed him. I don't think they're necessarily going to have success as 5-point underdogs. Anything we're missing here on the Packers, Johnny?
No, I do think if I was MMEing, I would be interested in the, you know, at least boosting my like Barkley to Eagles D and my Jacobs to Packers D, but I don't think as a hand build, I probably wouldn't rush to make those correlations. Because I do think there's a chance that this game, whichever team is like really crushing, is running the ball so slowly and annoyingly that the defense, like if Jacobs gets like 30 touches, you know, it doesn't necessarily mean the Packers defense went off because of sort of just how they run their offense and how they slow the game down. Same with the Eagles. If Barkley gets his 30 touches, was probably slow too. And I think people forget about how ugly that can be for a defense if a team just has the ball the whole game.
Yeah, no, that's totally fair. Yeah, I mean, a lot of the opportunities for a defense to score fantasy points can be when the opposing team is trying to come back and throwing the ball everywhere recklessly. Yeah, definitely kind of an underrated thing that people do forget. Let's move on. Let's move on to the best game of the slate. We've got the Commanders at the Bucks. Bucks 3-point favorites, 50.5-point over under. Austin Eckler is back. Marshawn Lattimore is officially playing over on the Commanders side. I think this game has pretty easily the two best quarterbacks on the slate to me. That's not necessarily reflected in at least Baker Mayfield's ownership. So I'm very interested in stacking up this game as many kind of different ways as I can. We've seen Jaden Daniels go over 25 DK in 7 of his 10 games. If you take out all the ones he was hurt for, averaging nearly 27. Bucks pretty much the best matchup you could ask for opposing pass catchers. Biggest pass funnel in the league, top 3 by schedule adjusted. Close spread, shootout game script. Yeah, and anything I'm missing here, HiLo, or is this just Jaden Daniels' blow-up spot?
Potentially. And I think what's probably going to go overlooked, and we've talked a lot about this throughout the season, is Jaden Daniels' ceiling grows exponentially when he's under pressure because he has such a high scramble rate when pressured. Todd Bowles' defense, last time these two teams played was in week 1. Todd Bowles just brought it. He always does against a rookie quarterback. And we saw kind of what happened there. Jaden Daniels had 16 rush attempts in that game, tied for the season high. So, yeah, there's upside here for Jaden Daniels to hit the 100-yard bonus on the ground. And when you look at his pass catchers, it's like by name, it's like Terry McLaurin and everyone else. But if you look at like down the season, he did not lead the team in targets an exorbitant amount. And we saw that last 2 weeks with Olamide Zaccheaus. So it was Noah Brown. Now it's Olamide. I think Olamide is a really easy way to kind of get some salary saving and play him with Jaden Daniels. I also think that Zach Ertz is a very interesting way in the same vein, and Austin Eckler. Austin Eckler, before he was concussed, he had that, what was it, like a 9-target game? Yeah, 9-target game against the Eagles in week 11. Then he got concussed the following game. So he very clearly has upside in a single game sample to see some significant pass volume here. So I think I would prefer playing any of those 3, or maybe even like 2 of those 3 over Terry McLaurin personally in this spot.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely don't mind McLaurin. He does have a very nice schematic matchup here with the Bucks playing so much cover 3. McLaurin is top 7 in yards per out run against cover 3 this year. He's been priced down to 6,500. He's another one of these guys that has kind of been overpriced throughout the entire back half of the season. Now he's the cheapest he's been since week 6. So I definitely don't mind McLaurin, but yeah, I hear you. These are pretty enticing ways to save salary by going to these other options. Eckler over his last 4 games, even with Brian Robinson, has been at a 61% snap share. Like this is Austin Eckler leads all running backs in yards per touch this year, I believe, unless that had changed in his last game or two. So yeah, as far as like $4,800 running backs go on a short slate where there's like no other ways to save salary, I don't think Eckler is like the worst direction you can go. Agreed that Zacchaeus is one of the better punts on the slate. Same number of first read targets as McLaurin over the past 3 games. Anything else here on the Commanders side, Johnny?
Yeah, I think Eckler is a fantastic tournament play. There's been rumblings that Brian Robinson has been like legitimately hurt for like, I don't know, 7 weeks. All the Commanders beat writers like hate this dude. They're like, Brian Robinson is not good. He's hurt. Like, get him off the field. They've been Beats have been calling for Jeremy McNichols for like a month. So I think there's a decent chance that Austin Eckler plays more snaps, especially in a must-win playoff game, especially against a team that you just like can't run on, but you can throw on. So I think he has a ton of upside, especially because ownership projections sort of bouncing around. But if you play for the Saturday to Monday slate, but my guess is on the 6-game slate, Jaylen Warren will be more owned than Austin Eckler, and I think I would prefer Eckler at ownership there. So that's something to consider. But and like Hilo said, you can pair him with Jaden Daniels as well, and I think that's a pretty interesting way to go. Because Daniels is so hard to stack with the wide receivers, it's like, okay, I'll just play him with Eckler and move on from there and maybe play some of the Bucs side. So yeah, I like that a lot. I do think McLaurin's upside though, week to week is so good as a guy that everyone's always scared to click on. So I do think you'll get an ownership discount on him for both slates. And he's a pretty good price. And really it's like, I don't need McLaurin to score 35. I just need him to beat, Cortland Sutton, Jordan Addison, Lad McConkey. And I think, he can do that if this is if this game pops off. So I like McLaurin at ownership discount. Obviously the value play though is Zacchaeus or Zach Ertz. So that's kind of where I would think about with that.
Awesome. I guess moving over to the Bucs side, I kind of go back and forth on, honestly. Mayfield is pretty close to Daniels as a play for me. He's gone over 29 DK 6 times. That's tied with Lamar Jackson for the most of any QB on the slate. Obviously, Jackson quite a bit more expensive. It's a way better game environment. Mayfield leads the league in fantasy points per dropback against the blitz, which the Commanders love to do. And he's just a guy that's going to go out there and throw the ball on the goal line like 4 times if he feels like it, if he's pissed off enough, is kind of the vibe I get from Baker. Definitely a guy who would love to win you a tournament. So he's probably going to be one of my bigger stands this week if projected ownership kind of holds. But yeah, how are you feeling about Mayfield, about Bucs pass catchers? Who do you want to stack him with, Hilo?
The one thing that we haven't mentioned is both of these teams have a very clear funnel. Like the Commanders have faced the highest rush rate over expectation this season. The Buccaneers have faced the highest pass rate over expectation this season. And after Rachaad White almost fumbled the Buccaneers season away in week 17, his 2nd consecutive game with a lost fumble, we kind of saw Bucky Irving take over this backfield last week. So I think to Johnny's point earlier in the show where it's like, hey, RB1s might see a little bit extra juice here. Bucky Irving is probably like the poster boy for that argument. So I'm all in, I think, on this slate on Bucky Irving. Like, ownership be damned. Like, I know I can just differentiate elsewhere. It's just that good of a spot to me. We have like Marshawn Lattimore coming back. How effective is he going to be? Is he going to shadow? Is it going to be Lattimore Island on Mike Evans? I don't know. So I would actually prefer just playing like Jaden Daniels with any of the ways that we talked about earlier with Bucky Irving bring back, as opposed to trying to figure out what to do with Baker personally.
Yeah, no, I mean, certainly fair. Like Bucky Irving, I would say he's the only running back play on the slate that I think is actively good. because yeah, there's a very good chance he just comes out and gets all the touches, kind of regardless of what they say about wanting to get Rachaad White more involved. That's just kind of like whatever was my reaction to that. I don't really believe you. So yeah, I mean, Irving clearly projects as the best running back value for us and around the industry. So yeah, I wouldn't even fight you that hard if you told me you just wanted to lock button him on a slate like this. What about you, Johnny? Are you seeing anything else here with the Bucks? And I guess I'll pose it to you. Are we worried about the Marshawn Lattimore potential shadow on Mike Evans? I will say that Lattimore actually hasn't shadowed Evans in 3 of their last 4 meetings. But at Evans, since the Saints drafted Lattimore, Evans had done nothing against the Saints for years and years. So yeah, tell me kind of how you're thinking through this Bucs side.
I think it's important to note that there's a lot of noise in the Evans Lattimore numbers. There's been multiple games where Evans has been hurt. There was a game where one or both of them got thrown out. And so I think there's also been some games where Evans has like turbo dunked on Lattimore's head. So to say like whether it's definitely a thing that they like annoy each other, but I don't know how much of a ding it is to say that like he's actually going to go out and shut him down. So that's tough to say. I don't remember if Dan Quinn used any shadow coverage or if he had any guys who were sort of shadow corners. It's been a long time since Dan Quinn's been like relevant, so I don't remember. But I wouldn't really be concerned about it. I do think that the Baker, Evans, McMillan, like that triple stack is probably one of the better leverage plays in GPPs, just knowing that Bucky's going to be, if you play the Saturday slate or the Sunday slate, Bucky's going to be 60% owned. I mean, that's massive ownership. So I think, to your point, playing that Baker triple really, or you can even maybe do throw Kate Otten in there too and go crazy and just get full blown leverage off of Bucky. So in like the biggest field tournaments, I do think there's a ton of merit to doing that and fading Bucky when, first place pays you, 30-40% of the contest. But I do think if I'm hand building a team in smaller contests, Bucky's like the first guy you're putting in. And I think in the smallest fields, you're totally fine to do Baker, Bucky, and one of those wide receivers. I mean, if you did that the other week, you won all the small field tournaments. And I don't think it's a reason to ignore that again. I mean, they have a 27-point team total. I think that's totally fine to have all those guys. And especially on a small slate like this, I wouldn't run away from doing that.
Yeah. Go ahead.
No, and I was just going to say, I like McMillan a ton. I've seen a lot of people wanting to play Sterling Shepard. Big hard pass on that. I do think, he'll come back and he'll play a little bit, but I think we've gotten to the point where we can say McMillan is like a legitimate piece in this offense, and Sterling Shepard doesn't scare me away from that.
Yeah, no, with you on McMillan as well. I mean, another kind of rare, cheap receiver on this slate that is not super terrible. He's hit 3x his current salary in each of his last 5 games. Been a lot of touchdowns, but I mean, again, this is one of the best game environments on the slate. Wouldn't be that crazy to see him catch another. I guess only other thing I add on this game is just schematically with the Commanders play a lot of man coverage. Both Evans and McMillan also benefit quite a bit from that. But yeah, I think we can move on to the last
real quick.
game.
One thing I forgot to say. I think both of these defenses are really good plays. I think this is probably like, if I had to say what game has a pick 6 on the Sunday slate, I feel like it's probably this game if I had to pick one.
Okay. Yeah, I like it. All right. Yeah. So we can move on to the final game. We got the Vikings at the Rams. Game moved to Arizona. Vikings showing as 2.5-point favorites, 47.5 over under. I am having trouble kind of deciding what to make of this Vikings team. I feel like collectively we've all gone from like very high on the Vikings after they drubbed the Packers to very low on the Vikings after we watched what happened against the Lions in week 18 and they got kind of dressed down. In theory, this is a really great matchup for Sam Darnold. Rams are a top 5 schedule adjusted matchup for quarterbacks over the past 5 weeks. But how are you seeing this high-low? I guess I feel better about both of the Vikings wide receivers than I do about Darnold, which is maybe a reason for me to reconsider my kind of trepidation on Darnold.
Yeah, 2 things jump off the page to me from this game, and they're both kind of like from a theoretical sense. First of all, like I don't get the field's love for Aaron Jones this weekend. Like I just continue to not see it. Highly likely to see 16 to 18 running back opportunities. Highly unlikely to see like 21 plus. So I don't get it, man. I might full fade. This might be a hard stance for me this weekend on all slates is like full fade. Aaron Jones, man. But that's like theoretical stance number 1. Theoretical stance number 2 is the quote unquote secondary wide receivers for each of these teams carry massive leverage. Both Cooper Kupp and Jordan Addison. So we should expect like Justin Jefferson and Puka Nacua to be amongst the top of the ownership at the wide receiver position. It makes sense. Like these dudes are the clear alphas. Justin Jefferson is the best wide receiver in the league. Puka Nacua is arguably top 5, maybe higher than that, just from like what they do on the field, their route tree, what they're capable of, yards after the catch, all the things that we want in a wide receiver. Like these 2 dudes are really, really it. But in the same vein, like Cooper Kupp has this massive red zone role. We've seen what Minnesota wants to do. They're doing a lot of funky stuff with coverages behind these really unique blitzes. They're running a lot of cover 2 behind it. They're running a lot of 2 high. And when you get Jordan Addison, who is streaking down the field, potentially getting coverage, strong side safety rolled towards Justin Jefferson's side, we've seen what he can do. So these 2 guys, they're each coming in like, depending on where you look, they're both sub 10% ownership. I think Cooper Kupp is like sub 5% ownership. So these 2 dudes are like the top like leverage stances to me on this slate.
Yeah, I'm definitely with you on Addison there, especially. We've seen the Vikings kind of spike their pass rate since week 13. Over that span, Addison's averaging 16.6 DraftKings fantasy points per game. That would rank as the wide receiver 6 on the slate. Price is just the wide receiver 11. So yeah, but you're not really seeing that value reflected in ownership. So I'm definitely with you there. I do think the Aaron Jones conversation is interesting. I've seen around the industry, he's kind of projecting as the second best running back value behind Bucky Irving. I've seen him in like cash shells. I get that there aren't really that many alternatives. So I guess kind of similar to what I was saying about J.K. Dobbins earlier for like a full slate build. There's just not that many running backs that are around 6K and that you can project for a full workload. The issue with Aaron Jones is like these past 2 games he's gotten nicked up and suddenly we're seeing Cam Akers in at the goal line. It's like, what are we doing here? What we're hoping Aaron Jones can just be this bell cow come playoff time. We've kind of seen that with him with the Packers in years past. But yeah, I don't know if I'm fully ready to take that plunge, at least without like some more encouraging coach speak or news on him, and kind of on this nagging injury from him. Johnny, I guess, how are you seeing Aaron Jones? And then anything else to say on the Viking side here?
I think on the on the main slate, I think, or the 6-game slate, I think people just see him as like the 6K running back who plays in the final game. So I think that's kind of where he just like fills a slot, and then people, well, I'll figure it out later, and then they just like leave him in. So I think that's why you get this huge ownership gap between Dobbins and Jones. And it's like, I think Dobbins is like just as good a play as Aaron Jones. But he's not going to get any of the ownership because he plays first and because, he's J.K. Dobbins. So I do agree there. And I think the cash build that I've seen a lot of people doing for the 6-game slate is Darnold, Jones, and Jefferson. And I feel like playing the 3 of those together is probably pretty bad, especially because they're all last. You don't really get to make any adjustments. You're just sort of stuck with those three. So that's something to consider with like in the smaller field GPPs. That's going to be something people will play, which is horrible. I think in a small field tournament, at the ownership that you're going to get on all three of those guys. So I think Jones is probably a pretty clear tournament fade. I think in the big slate for me, I think I'd probably agree there. I think Jefferson, I feel like everyone's projecting. I think he'll be a little lower owned than everyone's projecting just because it's hard to fit him and Puka. And I think people will prefer to play Puka. So I do think you probably get maybe 10% ownership discount on Jefferson than Puka, which is pretty interesting to me. Like just to play, I think playing Jefferson with Cooper Kupp is pretty interesting to HiLow's point on that, especially knowing, how Minnesota gets beat up. So I think that's kind of how I feel about them. I do think Darnold projects the best, though, of all the quarterbacks for the 6-game slate in terms of cost and projection. So I think he'll be the highest owned. And I don't know. I never want to play Darnold when he's the highest owned, but he always comes out and throws 4 touchdowns anyway. So I think I'm fine with him, but he's probably a little over owned. I think that's kind of where I feel on Darnold.
Yeah, no, I'm pretty much fully with you. Just not that excited to play Darnold as the highest owned QB. I guess the only other guy we should mention is TJ Hawkinson. Again, I think he's fine if you are stacking up this game. Best schedule adjusted matchup of any tight end on the slate, which is a little bit noteworthy. He's I guess for a tight end on this slate is a little expensive at 4,200, but not too bad there, in my opinion. So I guess moving back over to the Rams side here, I think you can play Matt Stafford. I think it absolutely has to be a double stack with Stafford. You have to play Puka plus Kupp. Kupp, in fairness, has not gone over 6 DK since week 13, or he's done it once since week 13. But he also averages nearly 24 DK in all games that Stafford exceeds just 18 points. So I think Kupp is absolutely required in any Stafford lineup. Outside of that, I'm not super interested in him. With Puka, I think we've kind of alluded to him a lot. Probably the best, ignoring ownership, best wide receiver play on the slate, projects as the best wide receiver on the slate. HiLow, anything you're seeing differently here on the Rams side? It's just kind of a very straightforward and concentrated offense. I should ask you about Kyren Williams, I guess, because I know people have had some interest in him as well this week.
Yeah, I'm not on Kyren. I think it's Puka. I think it's Cooper Kupp. It's again like that situation, similar discussion to Josh Jacobs. Like the Rams probably want to come in with a game plan to get him a ton of touches, but it's like this is one of the most adaptable coaches in the league. And I don't see them wanting to continue running Kyren into a brick wall if this Minnesota defense is. Kyren is not Jahmyr Gibbs. We saw what Jahmyr Gibbs did to this defense, but two very different backs, and how they are utilized is very different. So it's hard for me to click Kyren over going down to Bucky or up to Derrick Henry or Saquon.
Yeah, no, I'm with you there. And his role has just been so much worse too since Puka and Kupp came back. Just 1.5 targets per game since week 12. To me, he's like a kind of just a game script bet, but not even like a particularly exciting one. Like, can Kyren Williams fall into the end zone 2 or 3 times? Absolutely, we've seen that happen. But yeah, kind of beyond that, just nothing that gets me that excited. Johnny, wrap us up here with the Rams. Anything else to add here? With Stafford and the pass catchers, or with Kyren Williams, or I guess anyone else you want to bring up?
I think Kyren's the running back at least on the 6-game slate I would most be interested in stacking with the defense. I think like a Darnold meltdown game is probably something that that could pair really, really well with Kyron. Because like you said, he's the guy that like you just won at the 3-yard line over and over and over. Because he hasn't been getting those big, PPR games like we've seen from him in the past. And that's really what makes it hard to, play him. And if this game shoots out, like he probably isn't all that good. And I don't know. Stafford's a tough sell for me. I would agree that you have to play him as a double stack. He's been like low key horrible for like a month. And so I do think, but he's getting some ownership. And I think it's mostly just because like if you run an optimizer, Puka projects so well that you just end up with Stafford teams. So that makes me think that I might just not play Stafford much at all on the slate. And but if I do, I'm going to make sure that it's with Cup, because that like Stafford Puka single is like, the ownership you're going to get on that is just not worth playing. And that's probably about it on the Rams side. I do think the Rams defense in hopes that Darnold looks like he did last week is interesting, but I think on a neutral playing field, I like the Vikings a lot here. I think they will do pretty well.
All right. Yeah, no, I think that's going to about do it. Yeah, good job, guys. Yeah, wild card slate. Good show, everybody. You can catch us in Discord. I know I'll be around Discord all weekend. I'm sure Johnny's going to be as well. And right after this, in about 20 minutes from now, Jake Tribbey and myself will be live on the Underdog Drafter Party, drafting Battle Royale teams for this wild card slate. Should be a good time. Come hang out, have a beer with us. Yeah, looking forward to that. So thank you guys. Thank you, Hilo. Thank you, Johnny. And good luck this weekend, everybody.
What?
Why are you shaking your head?
You're welcome.